Good evening and happy Halloween. As I was doing here before, and I'm sure you all probably ran home and did, all the little kiddies came by with the candy, so we got as many of them done as we could. So we're going to start. I'm going to go through my usual opening for administrative, and then I'll update the agenda to let you know what we have on the schedule. For the record, petitions to be heard this evening were advertised in the Connecticut Post on October 18th and October 25th. These properties were duly posted on October 24th. And tonight we have with us a full commission: Mr. Joe Paul, Mr. Steve Augustus, Mr. Mark Giuliano, Mr. Dave Fuller, myself, Stephanie Phillips, the Planning and Administrative and Zoning Officer, Jay Hibansky, Mr. John Florek, I think, sitting in as our attorney, and Mr. Brian Leclerc as also sitting in with us. So we are all happy to see you this evening. Okay, as far as let me borrow your sheet so I can see which one. Be easier. There's a couple of changes to the agenda this evening, so if anybody's here for these applications, I want you to know now what is being heard. Number one, under continued items, we had an application 211 Ferry Boulevard. That has been continued by the request of the applicant. Under new items, we had a text amendment, a petition by the Stratford Building Needs Committee regarding a civic use in an LB zone. That also has been asked to be continued by the applicant. And then the fifth item, or what's called number 5, 45 North Parade and 245 King Street, a petition of, again, the Stratford Building Needs Committee to change it from an RS4 to an LB zone. That has also been continued. And there's 2 more, yes. Nobody wants to work on Halloweens. Yeah, everybody's out trick-or-treating. The next one is a text amendment. A petition by Erstad Biddle Property seeking to amend a regulation regarding the maximum allowable height in an MA zone. That has been continued. And the last one is 50-104 East Main Street and 25-66 Sydney Street, a petition of, again, Erstad Biddle Property seeking a special case approval to construct a 121,000 self-storage facility in an MA zone. So those five property applications have been continued to the following month. Okay. All right. So we have actually two applications, I guess, to hear this evening before we go into administrative session.
Madam Chair,
And a new
I'll
one.
do the Robert's
And a
rules
close
of the
vote.
stuff. So,
Mr. Fuller?
oh yeah, Madam Chair, with the understanding there's a lot of continued items on the agenda, I'm going to motion to take agenda item from the continued items, number 2, text amendment, Stratford Zoning Commission, out of order to be the first item heard tonight.
Actually, it was going to be the first item since the one before it got continued.
Yeah, but still we have to technically.
Would you like to you made a motion?
Yes, I
Second by
made a
Mr. Giuliano. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Mr. Fuller, how about you start us off today?
Oh, sure, yes. I've read this one before many times, and sometimes from the seat up there as well. Text amendments, petition the Stratford Zoning Commission to add a new section 15B, regarding medical marijuana dispensaries and production facilities, and revise section 3.30 regarding moratorium on such facilities.
Thank you very much. Mr. Hibansky.
So just an update to the commission. I know you folks probably received this in your packet. At the last meeting, it was left open. Ms. Tammy Trojanowski was asked if she would be willing to provide some additional information. The Zoning Commission left the hearing open. Upon doing some further research, Ms. Trojanowski determined that she was not able to come, and the letter, I'll just read the letter into the record for everybody. Good morning, Jay. According to the regulation that restricts lobbying with federal funds, it is not allowable to offer specific recommendations regarding the text amendment to lift the moratorium on marijuana dispensaries. The Stratford Partnership for Youth and Families is a federal drug-free communities grantee and is administered by Community Services, a division of the Health Department. As such, the Stratford Partnership must remain in compliance with this and other federal regulations. Providing information is allowable, which was offered at the September 26, 2017 Stratford Zoning Commission public hearing. At this time, the partnership does not have any additional information for zoning commissioners. Please extend my appreciation to the members of the Stratford Zoning Commission for inviting further comment and their thoughtful consideration of the information. Tammy Chorzanowski.
Thank you. All right. So we still have a public hearing. And is there any questions or comments from the commissioners? Mr. Fuller?
Yes, it was something that I started to think about when Ms. Trojanowski and members of the Family and Youth Services presented some information to the hearing, not yesterday, last month, about their major focus is to have a lot of children in a drug-free, safe zone and to kind of keep kids separate from drugs. And that certainly is laudable, and it got me thinking maybe one area we might want to discuss is maybe any potential age restrictions to dispensaries. Cultivation centers obviously wouldn't have that because they're not dispensing product, but dispensaries maybe to have a age restriction of 18 years old, because the other thought is if there is a minor that has such severe medical issues that would require such a strong painkiller, they're likely not going to be at home. They're likely going to have a lot of much more intensive services anyways. It might be something worth thinking about before we finalize the regulation.
Any other comment? Because I'll comment. The only concern I would have is I would begin to feel like I am overstepping the advice of a medical professional. If a medical professional feels that an underage person could have this treatment and we put a restriction that said you couldn't, it would seem to be an unfair burden and somewhat prejudicial.
I would disagree. We are not prohibiting a minor with a prescription from using their prescription. What we are prohibiting is a Stratford dispensary distributing medical marijuana to whatever we deem a minor to be, 18 or 21. Also, there are medications that are not, generally, Tylenol is not prescribed to infants of a certain age, and pharmacies have to follow that. Tobacco, which, although not medical, recreational substance, is on the books, locally, state, and federal, to be 18 or older. Alcohol, 21 and older, and that's across the board, local for federal.
But that would be my point. Unless there is a legislation, a state or federal restriction, are we adding additional restrictions above and beyond what the state and federal requirements would request?
Well, I would argue, how is that a bad thing? At what point does marijuana, whether it's benevolent and medical or recreational, at what point, it's just like there's certain alcohol that's medical. VIX 44, there's age restrictions on that, though there are minors who do have prescribed alcohol. There are age restrictions.
But at the same, okay, so I will counter back that taking Vicks, cough syrup, they have come out with children's dosage, children's products.
Which doesn't have alcohol.
Which, regardless, they've come out with products that are befitting a youth. If a dispensary under a doctor's supervision comes out with products that are befitting a youth, what would be our role to say that you still could not have them?
Well, your analogy is really bad. It's children's Sudafed does not have alcohol in it. That's not the VIX 44 formula has alcohol. It's 10%. It's strong. Teenagers could be prescribed it, but the drinking age is 21. But not 5 or 4-year-olds. They're not prescribed that, or infants. There's a reason for that. There are medical practices and laws in place that prohibit that. So I would say until a point where we know that it's okay for a 16-year-old to have medical marijuana, I would say we should play it safe and put an age restriction of 18.
But if they came out with a weaker dose, or even like Tylenol, there's a number of prescriptions that are weaker doses, formulations that are safe for young people. Again, these are prescriptions made under the doctor's supervision. Are we saying that a doctor does not have the knowledge and understanding to know what a young person's physiology can handle, and therefore cannot be trusted to prescribe a prescription that would be suitable to them?
Yes. In some cases, yes. There are, for lack of a better word, pill pushers out there. There are doctors who abuse the system, and there are patients who abuse the system, and there are others who try. This is about preventing medical marijuana product from getting into the hands of the youth where it should otherwise not be. To have that allows an enforceable element to that. If we find that all of a sudden there's a lot of product from one location that's not used for the intended purpose that's used for, a prescribed purpose, it allows us to put extra enforcement on that.
I could see it at that point, but given that the restrictions and controls that are in place already on medical marijuana and the supervision that has been placed in the controls, every doctor cannot prescribe these types of drugs. There are very few limited doctors who have the authority to prescribe medical marijuana treatments, unlike some of the other opiates where any doctor's license would probably do. This is a very controlled substance, so I don't quite see it in the same category.
But, I mean, so it's Tylenol. Tylenol is much more common, much more safe than, say, oxycodone or other pain, or Vicodins or any of those painkillers, or morphine. But medical marijuana is probably more dangerous than your rudimentary ibuprofen. But still, there are suggested and adhered to practices on what the appropriate ages are. And we may not necessarily know what that is with medical marijuana, so it might be the prudent thing to start with 18 now and then re-legislate when we learn more about the medical marijuana science.
I would counter that alcohol is not considered safer. I think it's in a different category in and of itself, and it's managed differently. It's not considered a controlled substance. Even opioids for children are controlled. Again, if there was a medical reason that a young person needed medical marijuana as opposed to taking an opioid, I would feel that that would be a choice that's safer for that young person than to force them into an opioid use because we've made a restriction only based on our societal age.
How do you know they're going to get an opioid over marijuana? Are you a medical professional, Madam Chair?
Well, I'm just saying the same thing to you. You're not a medical professional either. So for us to dictate that the threshold is 18, could be 16, could be 15, that's not a physiology as a doctor that I would be able to make that decision on.
But as a substance in town, as a land use board that's permitting a certain kind of business, we do have that authority.
Mr. Paul?
Yes, very healthy debate, but I understand, I know we have a public hearing we're going to try to schedule in the future, but I would think that based on this debate we're having today, we should look at taking a closer look at all the regulatory requirements we're going to be expecting to adhere to, as well as making sure we define how we're going to monitor compliance. So I think we still got some homework in regards to the implementation of a medical marijuana facility.
Mr. Giuliano?
To this debate, it's good, but if we put the 18 years on it, first of all, everybody has to go to a doctor. You have to file with the state. So if a 16-year-old is going to need some of this medical marijuana that's going to help him, he's already going to be going to a doctor to get this prescription. I mean, to play it safe, if you want to say 18 and then just say in doctor's order for everybody else under, even though it's kind of double whammy in it, because you're already going for a doctor for it to be if I was 18 or plus. So you have to get a doctor's orders to get this anyways, regardless if you're 16 or 18.
Correct. Mr. Raguskas?
I'm just wondering if any of the other communities in Connecticut that have medical marijuana dispensaries have a similar restriction. And if they don't, I don't remember hearing about any problems that they've had because of it. So I'm not really sure why we would want to blaze a new trail to prevent a problem that doesn't seem to be happening.
This point, I'm going to let the town attorney kind of weigh in on both points, if you could.
Well, first of all, any regulations that you create and pass have to be grounded in the enabling legislation at the state level, which allows you to do it. And I suppose what Mr. Fuller is talking about has to do with the health and safety of the community. However, I think you need to be careful about trying to micromanage certain things where those areas are already covered by state statute or state regulation. And so there are state regulations which deal with who are qualified recipients of medical marijuana. There are in place procedures involving minors, the prescription of medical marijuana for minors. And so I think that if you try to enact a zoning regulation which goes against those regulations that are already in place on the state level, you risk having that part of the regulation be deemed unenforceable. So I would be careful trying to micromanage that type of an area.
Would it then be possible, say, instead of an age restriction, to have a verification of prescriptions? Say, should there be a local enforcement issue, which could be enabled into a zoning regulation?
So you're looking for what again, Dave?
That the recipient of the medical marijuana has the valid credentials to receive such product.
Well, they have to, yeah.
Yeah.
But you certainly can make that a requirement because that is a requirement of state regulations already. They, they
And
have
the
to be
reason for that would be also to add in a local enforcement issue. Should there ever be a case where the town may need to enforce?
by zoning.
Yeah.
I would think it would. People who are obtaining medical marijuana without the appropriate prescription for the same or without qualifying would be in violation of criminal statute as opposed
Well, I'm also thinking more of the
zoning, a local
establishment.
zoning ordinance.
If the establishment is giving it to people who should not be receiving it, we have
but
zoning
those-
regulations on the book. If you violate the zoning regulations, there is a zoning enforcement corrective action.
I guess you could do that, but don't forget, those establishments are also already highly regulated by the state, and violations, just like, the Liquor Control Commission oversees violations of the liquor regulation by bars and taverns and restaurants, violations of the regulations by virtue of a marijuana dispensary, medical marijuana dispensary, are going to be likewise already under the state purview. So, I mean, could you add it as a feel-good measure? Maybe you can. I'm not sure it accomplishes anything really that's already not on the books at the state level.
Okay, well, that answers my questions.
Mr. Paul?
Yeah, I'm glad to hear that the state regulation should trump the whole process. I mean, just so we have uniformity in how we administer this, it's a great idea. I, for one, particularly want to give visibility to these state requirements if we're going to be making decisions about medical marijuana in the town of Stratford, as I suggest all the other members of the commission. But more importantly, beyond that, I still don't know, and I don't think we spelled out who is ultimately responsible for compliance, because we need to have somebody own the compliance of these requirements.
Compliance with the regulations regarding dispensing?
Compliance with all the state requirements governing medical marijuana.
Well, there are a number of them in fields other than dispensing. There's producing, there's a number of them. But with respect to what you're talking about here, dispensing, it appears that the obligation for compliance rests on the dispensary or the pharmacist actually in the dispensary that has the license to dispense medical marijuana.
Yeah, let me just give you an example, though. I mean, banks, for example, operate. They're responsible for complying with rules, but banks are regulated. There's a body that governs and audits the banks to make sure they're complying. What's the entity that's going to comply and make sure this complies?
Okay, that I don't know, whether it's the health department, the Department of Consumer Protection. I can't answer that.
Mr. Floric,
Yes.
Mr. Urbanski may be able to answer.
We would enforce the things that we have in our regulation, like it says you can't have a medical marijuana dispensary out of a mobile unit. It has to be in a brick and mortar building. Those are the things that we would be able to enforce locally. The Department of Consumer Protection would be enforcing, how it's being administered, if they're not meeting the state regulations.
The health department has a role in this as well. Don't they inspect or review the facility?
I just want to mention, though, whoever it is, and I'm sure there is entities out there, I'd like to have that entity come before the commission and talk about what they do to ensure compliance with these facilities. I think it's important for us to know who's going to be doing it and how they're going to do it, and that entity should own it and speak on how they're going to govern this.
Otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Fuller.
Yes, I'm taking a look at the Connecticut Department of Consumer Protection website. And by and large, the patients have to be 18 years of age, with the exception of a couple select conditions. So I think if we just reiterate what the state requirements are, per state consumer protections, we have local policy supporting and reinforcing state policy.
That would make a lot of sense. They would have to comply with all state and federal regulations as stated.
Well, it's not complying with federal regulation.
Well, state now, unless the federal ever decides to approve it, but all state regulations.
Yeah, so because it's... Yeah, I mean, it looks like there's a tier. For the most part, they're 18 and older with these really extenuating circumstances.
And there may be some unique scenarios that would be exception. To get back to Mr. Paul's point, this facility and our oversight and the town's oversight would be the same as we do with a pharmacy. Once we set the regulation, each department, as we normally do, would handle the regulations and the responsibility from the town side as we normally do, whether it be a pharmacy, a nail salon. There's a number of different examples. Beyond that, then you have the state agencies. So this permit would not be an exception to any of those. All of those agencies would still need to maintain their responsibility to complete their regulatory functions. And like a pharmacy, I know that there are several departments that are involved, everything from police to the health department to planning and zoning. Those are the key ones that I can think of, that each have a responsibility in this facility and a responsibility for regulation.
And I don't doubt that. I just feel that this is new. The town of Stratford hasn't implemented these medical marijuana facilities. May have one, may have two, but because it's new, it would be incumbent upon me to see, at least hearing from these entities that regulate and ensure compliance, that they can at least speak on how they've been doing it throughout the state, if it's a state agency, and if it's something that's going to have to be done locally, whether it's our health department or whatever, then I'd just like to make sure we've gotten some kind of acknowledgement that they understand what their role is.
I think my response to that would be that they already have existing regulations in place, and what typically happens is when a new business is employed in town, all of the departments are notified. If there's something exceptional about it, those departments know what their responsibilities are. Maybe if you want to say that there is a particular alert that is sent out from the mayor's office to make these departments that are responsible more aware that this is what this facility is coming in, that would make sense. But I don't see the need to add an additional layer of a department to come in and say, yes, we have regulations, we inspect them, and we handle them just like we would any other new business, whether it be a pharmacy, nail salon, tobacco shop. We actually do have those regulations in place, of which they've been implementing for eons.
I'm confident these individuals probably are going to do a good job, but I'm not sure, and maybe it just takes me getting closer to some of these entities that are out there, but I'd like to just hear from those regulatory bodies to make sure that I understand what their role is, just so nothing falls between the cracks, rather than assuming they're going to be able to properly monitor it. Because to me, I'm seeing this as being not only a monitoring of a facility, but there's a different dynamic that happens with this particular product, I think, that's different than what they've been used to monitoring.
Well, the only thing I would do, and I'm going to get Mr. Giuliano in a second, is we did have a joint planning and zoning meeting where the police department, the health department, they were here to talk on it and to offer their opinions and advice. I think you attended that one, is that correct?
I've attended a couple of them, but not all of them.
Yeah. That would have been the best time because the departments were actually here to talk to.
I can give Mr. Paul June 20th and April 18th are the minutes from when we both had
Thank you, Mr.
that.
Giuliano.
And I can't take it any farther because we're beating a dead horse. I have the list of all the other dispensaries that are already in progress, not adding the 2 in Milford. And this is a highly regulated industry, and Connecticut has structured it, unlike many states, to provide a highly organized system. All we got to do is go by what they have and have our own people monitor it to make sure. I mean, here, if anybody wants to look at it in the audience up here, here's 3 years of us going around
Well,
this subject.
I appreciate that, and I think that's great news. I'm just thinking if we're going to have a public hearing, that's good news. I think we should make sure that we're ready to speak on that kind of compliance issue. And I'm bringing it up in preparation for the public hearing.
I appreciate that. I will say, because I do want to bring this to a close, we've kept this public hearing open now for 3 meetings. It is time to close it, and it is time to see if there's anyone else who would like to speak to it. So I'm going to close the questions from the commissioners at this point, open it up to the public. Is there anyone who would like to speak in favor of this application? Is there anybody who wants to speak against or oppose this application? Okay. Then I'm going to ask for a motion to close the public
Madam
hearing.
Chair, I'll make a motion to close agenda item number 2, text
By
amendment.
Mr. Fuller, second by Mr. Giuliano. All in favor? Aye. Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. All right, we're going to go on to the second item. Our only other second item is number 6. Nope. Did I miss? Oh, number 3. That's right. Yeah, I think I will have to. If that's the same one? Okay, yeah, I need to recluse my. Number 3 is the text amendment, petition of 500 North Avenue. I do need to recuse myself. I have this applicant is a client of mine, so I don't want to prejudice this application. All right, thank you. Mr. Giuliano?
I think we talked and Mr. Fuller wanted to jump in there.
No, I'm asking you to chair the meeting in my absence.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All righty. Can we have somebody read this application? It would be number 3. Yes, number 3. Mr. Roguskis?
Sure. A text amendment, petition of 500 North Avenue LLC, seeking to amend the fee schedule to exempt 830G affordable housing projects from fees when submitting applications.
Thank you. All right. Do we have any discussion on that here? Nothing? Okay, I'll turn it over to Attorney Bellis.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. For the record, I'm Attorney Stephen Bellis, and I have a very, very short rebuttal. I just wanted to point out, some of the commissioners had some questions about the fact that the statute talks about that the applicant shall include the submission of a conceptual site plan describing the proposed development's total number of residential units, and that's in subsection C. I did go back and look and found a case, and I just wanted to bring it to your council's attention. It's called Eureka LLC versus the Planning and Zoning Commission of the Town of Richfield, and the case is a Supreme Court case, and the point that I wanted to make about it was that it says in its decision, it says, along with its applications, the plaintiff submitted a conceptual site plan that illustrated the potential future development. And then it goes on to say the plaintiff was not seeking formal site plan approval of the conceptual site plan. So I think this answers one of your gentlemen's questions. Can you just bring an initial site plan as an affordable application? And the court has said you can. And then, depending on how the commission were to rule, then the applicant would come back and then pay the fee for the site plan review. So that's all I had to say. I hope that helps. Okay,
Thank
very
you.
much.
Very good, Attorney Bellis.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. With that in hand, anybody have any questions on the commissioner side? No? Okay. And make a motion to,
We need the public.
I think we did the public already, didn't we?
Uh,
Just, all right, anybody in the public for this, step forward? Anybody for this, step forward? Anybody against this, step forward? Okay.
Motion to close hearing for the text amendment.
Seconded by Mr. Paul. That's it. All in favor?
Aye.
4 for it.
That's about as easy as it gets.
All right.
So it looks like we're taking number 6 out of order.
I don't want any more. Get away.
Now I'll take
Visible wall.
Oh, you found the candy.
Motion to take this
Oh, trick or treat? I don't know if that goes so well in a zoning meeting, trick or treat. Oh, the goodies, too. Does this mean I have to recuse myself? Oh, good. Oh, that's nice. Okay. The next application is Mr. Rogaskis. You want to fill us in on number 6?
Should I read the last one? Maybe Mr. Giuliano would like to...
Oh, okay, if he really,
Should we make a motion to take this out of order, too, because we're going to 6 from 3?
I'll
that's fine.
second that.
All right. I'll read it.
Put yourself up for that one.
140, 180 Watson Boulevard, petition of Asphalt Roof Recycling Center seeking special case approval to expand an asphalt recycling and processing facility to the adjacent property in a MB zone.
thank you very much. That was perfect. Okay. Mr. Casey.
Good evening. Thank you all, Madam Chairman, members of the Commission, representatives of town Stratford. My name is James Casey.
Yes,
I'm the president of Stratford Executive Park, and that is the owner of the subject property. Here with me this evening is Dave Rayner, the principal of the applicant, Sono Investments. I have with me the certificates of mailing, if I should pass those in.
It's organized.
I'd like to start out by handing out a couple of items. First item I'd like to submit for the record is a plan of 140 Watson Boulevard showing the original 1-acre approval for the processing of residential asphalt shingles. It's a single-page item, and it was approved in 2008. Please note that when you get a copy of this, if you look at the plan, the eastern side of the property is the railroad, adjacent to the railroad. And on this plan, you'll see an oddly drawn area with the words crushed material. When the original applicant was approved on the 140 Watson site, the site was a 2-acre site, and the DEP permit that was initially sent out allowed the applicant to be just 1 acre. So the area shown of interim use 1 acre processing residential shingles is what was approved, and then the rubble piles of crushed material were left over from demolishing the prior improvements on the property, basically concrete foundations and block. And if you look at the bottom of the page, or to the south of the site, you'll see 180 Watson Boulevard shown, and that is the subject of tonight's application. So, give you a little context of what we're next door to. Next, I would like to submit, for the record, a copy of a February 25th, 2013 approval, along with its site plan and a portion of its CAM application for a property known as 200 Watson Boulevard. It's a short stack of paper, and only the first 2 pages are relevant. If for some reason I didn't hand out enough, please just let me know.
Mr. Casey, I just want to make sure for the record, because I know that this came in at the last minute. There's a memo here from Mr. Goucher
Yes, we have.
Did you receive a copy
Yes,
of that?
there's nothing new in that memo.
Okay, I just want to make sure that you got it.
Thank you. Jay handed us a copy, and it was items we've reviewed
Well,
with them.
it came in today at 4:42, so
I know. Thank
I
you.
wanted to make sure.
Thank you very much. So now, if you have that in front of you, at the top of the page, you will now see the 140 Watson site, 1.99 acres, 2 acres. You'll see the 180 Watson site, which is approximately 0.65 acres. And then you'll see an area shown as ground asphalt roof shingles. That was an area that was approved for storage of the fully processed shingles, so that they were on the 140 site, and they were being processed, and then they were being stacked on the 200 Watson Boulevard site. And that approval was, again, in February of 2013. And now we get to subject of tonight's application. I have what's referred to as the zoning location survey for 180 Watson Boulevard, which is the subject of our application. I have a little version for myself right there. And if you look at that, the site, the 180 Watson site is 0.65 acres. It's adjacent to the operations of 140 Watson. It's improved by a 6,000 square foot building that was constructed in 1978. It shows a little bit of processing equipment on the property, as well as the processing equipment that's on the property. And I'll point to my plan so you can see what I'm talking about. This is the 180 site. Above it is 140 Watson. Below it is 200 Watson Boulevard. Here's the 6,000 square foot building. This is a line of processing equipment that extends from 140 Watson Boulevard onto 180 Watson, where the processed material is stacked and then loaded in trucks and shipped out. Current operations no longer bring the material all the way to 200 Watson Boulevard. And the last thing I'm going to submit is copies of a few photographs that are of an electric service that was installed on the 180 Watson site. It's about a $200,000 installation. It supplies 480 volts of power at 2,000 amps, and it powers everything in that processing line. A serious amount of power. We build buildings with electric services half that size. And that equipment is electric in lieu of diesel equipment, which was one thing that was an upgrade that the operator of the site had wanted to do. Now, the intent of this entire setup, getting 140 Watson approved for storing and sorting shingles, getting 200 Watson approved to store the finished product, and then getting this line of processing equipment set up was in anticipation of the state of Connecticut, Department of Environmental Protection, Department of Transportation, since 2006, getting this product fully allowable and usable into the pavement of the state of Connecticut. Since the operations began in 2008, pretty much everything gets shipped out of state while the state of Connecticut is getting everything in order. There have been a number of issues that the Department of Transportation has just been unwilling to deal with or solve. And in lieu of that, that makes the use of this product limited to only those in the private sector that would buy this material in an asphalt mix. And that requires asphalt plants to be allowed to use this when they make asphalt. the Department of Environmental Protection has introduced, like I said, back to 2006, that this product is a beneficial product. It should be used, taken out of the stream of municipal solid waste, but they haven't approved one asphalt plant to use this in the mix. And that's not the state specification mix. That's any mix that somebody like myself would take advantage of and purchase. So it's been a very limited market for the shingles. And you know, I'm going to introduce Dave in a little while, but you know, Dave didn't come to Connecticut and dream up a business to send his kids to college. I mean, he thought this was a growing recycling community. He thought it would be fully supported. The Department of Environmental Protection was the people behind it and pushing it. And it's proved extremely frustrating. And I know that there are numerous problems with the visibility of what's on the site. It's got a lot of people that are objecting to it. It has a lot of dialogue with different departments in town, as well as the DEP. And at the moment, before I introduce Dave, I would like to just take a breath and open it up to some questions, because I've bombarded you all with a fair amount of paperwork, and I just want to see where we are so far with questions.
Okay, folks, you want to go? Anybody? Mr. Fuller?
I'll pass. I do have some questions, but I want to give...
Mr. Giuliano?
Sure, I have one for now. So where are you selling this if you're not getting approval? What's it getting mixed into?
Well, it goes out of state to
Out of state?
to neighboring states that use this. There's
For asphalt
yes,
that are approved?
yes.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Augustus? No questions this time. Mr. Paul? Okay. I have some remedial questions, so bear with me. You were approved for 140, you were approved for 200, but you weren't approved for 180. What was the previous life of 180? It belonged to somebody else, or?
No, not at all. 180 Watson was just turned up to be vacant property, and initially it wasn't ever going to be part of what these operations were. And I think what happened was very simple. In order to gear up, because of years and years of piling material and not selling a lot, there was anticipation of the need to have the ability to really produce a finished product and, you know, get into business, sell some product. So 180 became available. Dave and I met. We talked about it. I'll be completely frank with everyone. I never thought to file an application. 180's been approved. It's an industrial zone. I had no real understanding we would be violating special case application for processing outdoors without approval. Never, you know, and I'll say this even further, that if the one plant in the state of Connecticut had been authorized to use this material, we wouldn't be here tonight, because 50% of that pile would probably already be gone, and we would have already reconfigured things, because it's not the greatest arrangement, the way we have things set up to operate the business.
Okay. So now 180 became available, and I go down to the transfer station all the time. It looks like you've already kind of spilled over into 180. Is that correct?
Correct. We've been operating there for a while,
Okay.
with in the back of the facility grinding. Indoors, there's a lot of activities going on that nobody has a problem with what's happening inside the building. It's the processing equipment running from the back of 140 Watson into the back
Down the
of
conveyor line.
and piling material.
Okay. Now, the equipment that you just gave us, what's the purpose, or where is that located? How does this fit into the picture?
If you look at this plan of 180 Watson in northeast this direction, in the bottom right-hand corner of the building is a United Illuminating transformer. And the electric service is inside the property, and then it's fed overhead to the equipment here. And it's 2,000 amps, 480 voltage, and it powers this entire line of equipment.
And your point is that if this isn't approved,
Well,
then you have a
again,
problem.
it's just where we are. It's not your fault, it's ours. And
Okay.
I'm just pointing out facts.
So that, to make this whole plan work, the closest available power was that particular location. You made it work, but now we have to come back and look at, how do we approve this? because it's already in place, and that's a pretty big piece of equipment, a lot of power, and I guess it's very expensive or difficult to move or change if we really wanted to.
It is all of that, no question about it. And earlier, I also showed a site plan, the first handout that I pointed out to everybody, the original 1 acre plan. I'm going to point to the subject 180 Watson plan. Remember, on the 140 site, it was originally approved for just 1 acre of usage. There was a pile of rubble here and a pile of rubble here. That mountain of shingles on 140 is covering a lot of that rubble. It wasn't moved off the site. So we are going to endeavor to get that material to clear a path to that, which will help us with our volume issues of what's on 140 Watson, because it's not all just shingles. There's, I don't know, quantities, what have you. And that was, one of our goals, which that's a process we can work on, and then we can work on reconfiguring things depending on how much support or how little support we can garnish here.
I want to share the floor. Mr. Fuller has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you started to go into an line of questions that I wanted to get to, but I wanted to give everyone a first pass. One of my main concerns is not necessarily the use that you're proposing, but a big goal of the Plan of Conservation and Development and overall planning and zoning policy in this town is aesthetics and enhancing property values. Could you start to speak to about the pile of shingles and tiles and rubble and everything and how you intend to move that out? Could you tell me how you're going to fix up the overall look of the facility, any vegetation or green space, fixing up the appearance of the buildings? Could you speak to any of that?
There are some plans that do include replanting the northern boundary of 140 Watson and doing it in such a way that both the DEP and the town are okay with that. And those are items we're working on getting approved with the DEP at the moment. In the rear of the property, we've done some clearing in the back. We've set up a series of concrete blocks that nobody can really see. And we're proposing putting a fence on that, again, to screen from folks on the back side of it and to clearly contain anything from just blowing off easily. Once the DEP has reviewed all of the things we're working on to get them to review and approve. The front of the property, the best we can do is to start grinding this stuff and using it in the state of Connecticut so that the piles are manageable and that we reduce the volume on the site. That will be the biggest thing, because there's nowhere to hide piles of concrete or dirt, or in this case, asphalt shingles. And I think the volume issue is the number one issue that will always be people's main concerns, as well as the fact that nobody wants to stare at something that doesn't look great. But it is a heavy industrial zone. It does, if you all allow it, have a timer on it to do what it's trying to accomplish. And all it's trying to accomplish is to get a business going forward, because right now it's been nothing but a hobby, as the state of Connecticut is just not quite at the finish line with this business plan. We're open to all sorts of suggestions and things that can be done, but it's hard to hide 18 feet of anything from, driving down a roadway.
And I agree. The pile is like the biggest unsightly, and nobody really wants to look at it. You're trying to get rid of it and use that product and sell that service. And I agree, that should be focus number one, should you get to the approval points, not just of zoning, but the DEP and all the other regulatory boards. So after that, I imagine that would be some making the plant more green, more sightly, the fencing, any fixing of the painting or the roofing of the building. So I'm glad to hear that too, because that is pretty much that's the 800-pound elephant in the room, for lack of a better term, is that pile. So I'm glad to hear that. I don't know if you have other experts to speak about the consent order, but we got a document today from the DEP.
Sure.
I don't know if you want to address
I'd be
that
happy
or not.
to. So in 2008, the DEP permitted Dave to proceed with a 1 acre and store 10,000 cubic yards of shingles, and there were, 2 or 3 permitted in the state, maybe 4. And in 2011, the DEP sent out notices. They wanted to change the permit, they wanted comments, and they wanted input back from everybody. And then Dave got a phone call asking why he didn't give them any input. And the reason he didn't give them any input was he never got a notice that they wanted his input and that they were changing the permit that they'd already given him, and that now he didn't have a permit, and he had to start over and apply for another permit. So they're not really good and efficient at communicating. So the consent order that you just referenced, the town got it, we never got it. We were working with the town on town issues, and it was handed to us saying, what are you going to do about this? We took a copy of it, we called them up. Again, I mean, there's 3 permits in the state of Connecticut that I'm aware of. They still don't know how to deliver mail to us. We met with them, we've gone through everything on their laundry list, and I think we have consensus on all the major issues, but we got to have more meetings. It's a big entity, there's a lot of moving parts. The best news I have is that the Commissioner's Office of the Department of Environmental Protection contacted me on Tuesday and has agreed to meet with us and discuss the log jams to getting this moving forward in a way we all want to see it move forward with himself and his staff. So not an environmental analyst 3, even though everything that gentleman says, we understand their issues. And we're working on that list with them.
Okay, thank you. That pretty much addresses it. It sounds like a lot of red tape.
Mr. Agaskis?
Yeah, I've got a couple questions, just clarifications based on things you've said. It sounds like your stockpiling of materials would be solved if the state changes its statutes and accepts the material for use in the state. Is that?
Well, that's true, but remember, the state is the one that issued the request for parties willing to do this, deemed it usable, but then the other half of the building last year, when the first asphalt plant was scheduled to come online, having applied to incorporate this into the mix, was denied use of it.
Okay.
And they didn't even have the paperwork that we have that would have probably, not necessarily, gotten it approved. And that's one of the biggest asphalt plants in the state of Connecticut. So that's what we are endeavoring to get. It's not just necessarily the statutes, it's every different department within the environmental protection folks signing off that it can now be processed. And what's hard to really digest is, you know, raw asphalt is raw asphalt. I mean, it's made from barrels of oil. The shingles are 25, 30% asphalt. When you grind them up, you only have a couple other things that are in them. Everybody knows what they are. And whether you're pouring raw asphalt or ground shingles, not a whole lot different with what you're doing as far as a formula. It's just a question of getting it, all the boxes checked and everybody saying okay. So you're exactly right. It's kind of some interior things of the department that have to be done because they have the general permit that's already pretending this stuff can be used.
That was sort of the preliminary part of the question. The real question is, do you have any reason to believe that that's going to happen anytime in the near future?
Well, we're optimists. There's over 25 states using this stuff already.
Okay.
The state of Connecticut is the state of Connecticut. We just got a budget, I think. We're dealing with lots of back issues that related. 8 out of the largest paver in the state's plants this year had the worst year in the history and were closed and they didn't even operate. Paving was so bad. And one of the reasons paving was so bad was twofold: weather and no state budget to fund additional paving. So we just had the worst paving year in the history of the last 18 years of the state of Connecticut. I think it's going to get better.
Okay. My second question, and again, it's just a clarification. I believe what you said was that when you took control of the property, there was a pile of debris, and now these asphalt shingles are on top of it, and you want to move them so you can get rid of the debris. That seems kind of backwards to me. Why didn't you get rid of the debris before putting a pile of shingles on top of it?
I don't disagree. Remember what happened. We got called, and all of a sudden we're told that our 1-acre permit was no longer valid, and you have to go to 2 acres. And there's not much being sold, so we mobilized and hauled, and this material is very well known what it is. It's the former block and concrete of a building that was there, 2 buildings actually, for more than 25 years. That was crushed up and piled, and we hauled it and got 80% of it off the site. I didn't remember, we had left a little bit, but at the time it wasn't in anybody's way, and it wasn't going to cause a problem. When it came time to deal with how to grind and produce as much product in anticipation of the state adopting it, it was served a good base to create this line of equipment to feed from one site across to the other, ultimately to the other site where the material could be stockpiled. So from a design standpoint, we would never do it that way again.
All right, thank you.
Mr. Paul, do you have some?
Yeah, I just want to, my observation and what I'm hearing today is it's kind of difficult to digest the whole thing because I don't really know if you've clearly articulated your current situation and how this approval is going to completely put you in compliance, because there is a lot of non-compliance to what you've been doing. And there's some external things, DEP being one of them, that are going to impact your performance because of some of these unknowns. So I'm not sure I'm comfortable with your delivery today with regard to how this approval is going to make things 100% better for you. It might make things a little bit better, but I don't hear that it's going to be 100% better.
Well, let me tell you how we think it'll work. And it's how it's worked since 2008. When the state of Connecticut's Department of Environmental Protection changed the permit, I mean, we had to play catch up. But nobody said you can't continue to operate or do what you're doing. The DEP was very much aware of how things go. And, 6-month increments, things change for them. So, to your point, that list of long items that are a consent decree, we met with them in September, went through every single item. Nobody said, we're shutting you down, you people are not complying. We're doing everything we can to check off every single item as fast as we can. And they actually said, wait a second, don't put this fence up or don't put this border up. We want to get everybody in our department involved to review what you're doing and approve it. So if they shut us down, we're shut down. If you shut us down, we're shut down. We're not going to operate without permitting or under the guise of working towards 100% compliance. Now, we had some orders issued from town officials, and we met and we've talked, and everybody has given us the opportunity to get to here tonight with a laundry list of accomplishments of getting almost everything in compliance on the site from a town's perspective. There are still issues, and we plan to continue to work them off. The biggest one is the volume on the site. But make no mistake about it, we're not going to operate without a DEP permit, and we weren't trying to operate without a special case permit. It never dawned on me that that piece of equipment was going to land in the back of 180 and create a problem. We were trying to process the material and dump it on 200. We came in and got that approval. So it's not as bad as it looks, but it's not perfect. I won't disagree. And I've been doing this for 30 years, so I'm not here to pretend. It's purely what we're trying to accomplish.
I have two questions, or maybe two summaries. To me, there are two issues that are running concurrent. One is the compliance of 140 and 200, which you're already working, it sounds like, with DEP and the town. And you got this laundry list that you're working on. And it sounds like you're looking for some time to complete that, to bring it into compliance. Because for me, that would be essential. Number two, you've spilled over into 180, and you need that to be able to complete your operation so that you can maybe get to the point that you can become in compliance. My first reaction is I'd like to see you come into compliance first before we approve 180. But I recognize that it sounds like it's all sort of brought together because you can't do one without the other. But I'm also reluctant to say we're going to approve this for an indefinite amount of time.
No, it's very clear. We need at least a year to get the pile to the right size because the paving season's over. And the paving season. That
was my next thing. November is usually, they close.
Right. We need at least a year to get compliant with the volume issue on 140 watts. In order to do that, it does really help get us there with the 180 grinder the way it's set up. But the state DEP has that list of items. They're going to take 4 to 6 months to meet with us, review everything we show them before they approve, yes, we like the 10-foot offset with the trees over here and the fence on the back and all that. They're not going to be able to move as fast as we can. So they're going to hold us up on the other issues that are on the town's list that aren't fully compliant. And I have a paperwork from Dave. We can submit it for the record. It shows every item that Jay is aware of and everybody in the different departments of the town that's dealt with us of the status of each item. And we're close, other than a couple of side yard issues and the volume. And the volume is the hugest one. So to get the volume in order, we need them to start, using the material in the state. If they don't do it, we're making every opportunity. We've shipped to Canada. We've shipped to all neighboring states. We're going to get the volume down no matter how we can do it.
Let me break it down this way. I understand the volume is one issue. That's a very big issue. You need time to work that off, to sell it off. But there are other issues that are not dependent on the volume. How do we ensure that, say, in 6 months, those items are done by the DEP and by the town, they are satisfied? Otherwise, we're not going to continue. I mean, those things are just as important and probably paramount to also moving the volume down.
I've got a meeting in the next 2 to 3 weeks with the commissioner of the DEP. We will try and get a response from them as to how timely they can give us the side yard issues approval that are on the list of items to accomplish. I can't speak for them, but I know I can ask them to speak for themselves. It shouldn't be that hard. We just have to press them on it.
I'm inclined to do benchmarks so that we can follow through to make sure that, A, you're following through on your side of it, but B, if you need assistance from the town or otherwise, that we can provide assistance so that the state follows through on their side, which is what you're also talking to. Mr. Floric, is there a way to structure this that will allow benchmarks that are fair, to allow the applicant to be able to complete in compliance, maintain operations, but yet allow us to come back to this and be able to see what we've progressed?
I'd have to think about that. I mean, you certainly can place conditions upon the grant, any approval of special case. But once a special case is approved, it tends to run with the land. So, I mean, I'd really have to think about whether there's any way to put the type of benchmarks you're talking about in force so that corrective action could be taken by this commission after the approval has already been given. I'm really not confident that you could do that, but I mean, I certainly can look at it, but it's a problem, I think.
I'd be willing to have you look at that. I mean, I understand the market didn't go the way we expected approvals. I understood the need for a business person who's trying to do all the right things. But on the other side, we still have to maintain compliancy. They go hand in hand. Giving a year to work at market conditions so that you can move off the volume, I personally could understand that. But at the same time, I would like to see the current compliance issue addressed and addressed quickly, and to take this time over the next 6 months to get that done, especially since you can't move the volume. And I'd like to see if there's some way that we could structure something that would work. I'm less comfortable, like you just indicated, of giving an approval, and that there's no way for us to go back and enforce that compliancy.
Yeah, and as I said, the problem is that, see, when you give a special case approval, you've already made a determination that that particular use on that particular parcel of land is approved. It's okay. And so, yes, you can stipulate that it's approved and it's okay, so long as certain conditions are met, which have to be found in the zoning regulations themselves, so which, turn back into the zoning regulations. But to then be able to say revoke or modify or without approval in some way, that's speculative, and you may have to you may have to rely on the zoning enforcement officer to do that if the approval that you've granted is not being met, if all those conditions aren't being met. But I have to think about that.
Okay. My alternatives, or the board's alternative, is if we deny or deny without prejudice, that will affect him negatively, correct?
Yes.
And that's almost punitive.
Yes, I mean, a denial certainly is a problem. A denial without prejudice eliminates the prohibition against bringing the same application back before
But it means
a
he
certain
couldn't
period of
operate at all.
Oh, no, absolutely. Not if special case approval is required in the first place.
I'll add only on site for 180 Watson Boulevard. It wouldn't affect their approvals for 140 Watson Boulevard.
That's true, if there are two different pieces of property, if only one is impacted by your decision here.
But a denial of 180, Mr. Casey, what impact of that, how would that impact you if you were denied and you did not have the use of 180?
Well, the material on site is not the kind of material we can just move around. It's delivered to us as the DEP defines it. So it's not like it's just rock and we can move
Pick it up and
The
move
finished product, we can put anywhere we want, provided we've got local approvals. And, you know, the unfortunate thing is, you know, if the material wasn't touching 180 and the equipment went from 140 to 200, we wouldn't be here tonight. Because I don't think anybody would care too much about what's happening above the ground, but it's landed and connected to power in 180. I would stipulate to anything you all feel comfortable to, with whatever checklists, whether or not they're 100% kosher or not, just to get out of a bind and show what we can accomplish. Now, you know, the law is the law, and I respect all of that, but I can stipulate with Dave's consensus to whatever is rational, and if we have to revise our application to include a timer on 180 and to revisit it and come back and submit reports or second review, I'm all for whatever works.
I'd like to make a recommendation to this commission to keep this public hearing open another month. I'd like to suggest that Mr. Casey and Mr. Floric try to work on some language that might be beneficial to both the town and Mr. Casey.
So, thank you. I'd be happy to.
Well, that's just a recommendation. I still need the commenting. Mr. Paul?
I think with that recommendation, shouldn't we or can't we also require them to come in compliance as much as possible with some of the areas that they can come in compliance
That would be
with?
the purpose of this. The purpose of that time would for them to look at a timeline of how you could come in compliance with 180. B, it would be looking at also when you could remove the volume off the property, which would probably be another benchmark. And third, I don't know if there is another one. Is there? Oh, yeah, an update with a meeting with Deep.
Nope, 100% right. No objection to anything. If we can get that approved, we would be we're working on that already.
What you're hearing is we're trying to work with you.
I understand.
All right.
appreciate it
You've
all.
kind of put us between a rock and a hard place.
I know. I definitely did.
Any other comments from the commissioners? If not, is there a motion to accept those three conditions, and we'll keep the public hearing, motion to keep the public hearing open?
Point of order, I think we should, before we do anything, see if there's any...
True. Thank you, Mr. Casey.
Thank you all.
We still have to
Well,
ask even if there's no one in the room.
I don't know if I want to take public comment now. Is there anyone here who would like to speak in favor of this application?
My name is Barry Knott, 1656 Main Street, Stratford, and I'd like to make an observation. I know Mr. Casey from these rooms and from the fact that he's involved with that whole Lordship Boulevard light industrial development. I've been watching him make presentations to this and other commissions for the last 30 years. I've been doing it a little longer, but I've been watching him for 30. all of the development that he's been involved with has been of the highest quality, as far as I can tell, from just being a taxpayer in town and being a lawyer that's a zoning lawyer. And I've never heard of a complaint about any of the projects that he was involved in the 30 years that he's been doing it. And I've been observing him because I'm interested in what's going on down there. Watson Boulevard is in the only heavy industrial zoned property in the town of Stratford. That's it. That's the heavy industrially zoned property. Now, from what he described and from what I understand is going on at DEP, he's in a morass of red tape that maybe partially his fault, maybe it's not, but I have a feeling that it's more of a bureaucratic problem, and this guy should get the benefit of the doubt, because I've observed him. There's never been a problem with any of the applications or any of the projects that he's proposed. He's done tremendous amount of development down there in the south end, including that FedEx thing that's down there right now, a huge development. And he's been involved in all of that. So I think you should give the guy the benefit of the doubt. I don't know anything about this, but he deserves the benefit of the doubt.
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Knott. I will only comment that, and I hope Mr. Casey recognizes that we are giving the benefit of the doubt, and we are really working hard to find a solution that is both legal and yet fair to the business, and that we all can feel comfortable with. Is there anybody else who wants to speak against this application? Please. Thank you.
My name is Tom Quinn. I'm the vice president at New Oval Pasta. We're the neighbor behind the Watson Boulevard property at 1330 Honey Spot Extension. And with all due respect, Mr. Casey was a wonderful, local developer. We work with him on other projects. With this particular project, because we're directly impacted by this.
Would you do us a favor just for our benefit?
Of course.
If possible, can you give us just a landmark of where you're at? Thank you.
No problem. We're actually, and the reason we are impacted is we're directly up against the asphalt pile. And again, with respect to the application and all, we've been there since September of 2014. We've been hearing for 3 years that the pile was going to go down, and it hasn't. And I understand all the economic issues they're dealing with, but that doesn't really affect our business. We're a food processing plant, and not only has that, we've been working with the town for the past 3 years of the issue of the volume, but also the fact that it's not just asphalt. If you go and inspect it, and I have photos, I go out there very frequently, it's in our backyard, there's other trash and things that get collected over time, and that affects the risk of pests and rodents and all sorts of things like that. Not intended by anybody, but still a result of the fact that that pile hasn't moved and doesn't move. It hasn't been covered. It's been covered on and off. I believe one of the agreements with the town, because we've met with the town over the last 3 years on a pretty regular basis, is that there was going to be covering, and there was for a while, and then there wasn't. It would go down, then it was supposed to go down, and it didn't, for probably a number of various reasons. But the fact is it still hasn't gone down. During the times of the year when the winds pick up and the pile is larger than it should be, there really is no block. And we get refuse and dust and everything on our property. We're constantly cleaning up that area. It is jammed up over the past year or two. Refrigerated trucks that we keep out there periodically during the year, and it gums up those systems and shuts them down. And we're on record many times with the town as the issues we've been having in getting compliance with the town regulations. So we ask that the town, we respectfully ask the town consider getting current enforcement first of the requirements, the regulations, and then look at any other approvals, from there. But we've been hearing for 3 years it would be remediated. It really hasn't, to the level that it really needs to be for what the requirements were set by the town, from what we understand from the town has told us, and from what the state, based on, again, what the town has advised us on.
Understood.
I believe there's a letter from me somewhere in the record as well, probably saying a lot more effectively than I just did. But
Understood.
thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Florek, you got that?
I got it.
Maybe you guys can, good. Anybody else who would like to speak against the application or opposed? Hearing that there's no other applications, I'd like to ask that this be tabled.
A point of order first, just to grant the petitioner right to rebuttal from,
Would you like to rebuttal, Mr. Casey?
The area that abuts Nuovo Pasta is separated by about a 30-foot right-of-way of debris. Railway where rail cars never go. It's got tons of stuff on it. We can recreate a barrier on our property. It's part of what we're trying to accomplish with Jay's understanding and the DEP's understanding. It'll be a priority one for us to get that fence and that blockade up and that side cleaned up so they're not dealing with as much as they're dealing with, and it'll be a marketable process you know, when you think something's going to happen and it doesn't, it looks like you did nothing. And I hear him. I mean, he's a tenant of mine in one of our buildings in 350 Long Beach, so I understand all sides of this. Thank you for the chance.
Thank you. Is there a motion to table?
so moved, Madam
By
Chair.
Mr. Fuller, second by Mr. Roguskis. All in favor?
Aye.
And Mr. Casey, Mr. Florek, I hope you get together soon, along with Mr. Herbansky, and keep in mind, we've got good neighbors as well. Thank you. Okay.
A motion to close the public hearing?
Yeah, I'm just saying. Motion by Mr. Fuller, second by Mr. Giuliano to close the public hearing. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? Motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, we got a few things here. All right, I'm just going through the administrative agenda for the administrative session. 211 Ferry Boulevard has been continued. As such, is the text amendment for the Stratford Zoning Commission. It's been continued. No, closed. Which, no, we didn't.
No, it's continued.
Oh, the marijuana. I did the wrong one. I was reading marijuana. Can we take the text amendment? Is there a motion to take the text amendment for the Zoning Commission for the medical marijuana dispensaries and production facilities off the table?
I'll make a motion to take it off the table.
By Mr. Fuller, is there a second? By Mr. Paul, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye, passes unanimously. Okay.
Madam Chair, if I may, for discussion, I would feel uncomfortable voting for it tonight, though I'm pretty well set in how I am going to vote on this. Only just as a courtesy to Commissioner Pepin, who's also spent many years deliberating on this issue as well.
Okay. Anybody else? Yes, no? Mr. Giuliano, do you want to?
Being that he put it that way, with all due respect for Ms. Pepin, I will have to go with him on that.
That's fine. That's why I'm asking.
Not what I wanted to do, but now that he brought it up. I mean, we've been dancing
Yeah.
this around
Well,
forever.
we
I
closed the
mean,
hearing, so it's just,
you
we
know,
could,
I mean-
next admin session, we could take care of it.
yeah, no,
Well, it's no motion yet, we're still,
Not a motion, we're just discussing. I just want to give everybody a chance to, yes, no?
That seems perfectly reasonable to me.
Okay. Motion to put it back on the table?
before I do that, I just, instead of thinking of the age restriction, I think we just, we enforce the consumer protection restrictions on how, who gets the products,
So you would like to add a stipulation?
to fully comply with
To
the
fully comply
State
with-
Department of Consumer Protection. We may have that language somewhere in there, but if it's not explicit,
It is, and I think that it's basically says in its section, we wouldn't be able to add a stipulation, we would have to add it to a section. If you look at the last section of, just get it out so I can see correctly.
The state details all the age restrictions anyways.
It doesn't speak specifically to the age restriction, but it says
The state
something
does.
to the effect that once a special case is approved, a condition of that approval is that it has to get a state permit, thus it has to comply with all
Okay,
state
perfect.
requirements.
Perfect.
It doesn't necessarily say an age, but it says,
No, the state has the age regulations
Correct.
taken care of. That's what I Googled tonight.
Good enough?
Yep.
If not, we'll have a chance to revisit it, if it
Yeah.
isn't there to your satisfaction. All right, I happen to agree with Mr. Fuller. I don't really have a problem. There's nothing that is time-sensitive on this, so let's,
Yeah, I just,
go ahead,
I have
Mr.
one,
Giuliano.
one question that just popped into my mind or whatever. Where do we stand if the government decides to say that, you know, we can't do this no more? I mean, so we'll be in the boat with 12 other cities, so I mean...
I was going to answer it, but I think Mr. Fuller is ready to answer it.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we'll get into a lot of hot water. I don't understand that part if they decide to say, you states can't do that. I mean, is it going to be a lawsuit, so on and so forth, Mr. Fuller?
Well, I have to be recognized by the chair.
Mr. Fuller?
This is what happens when you work on an issue for almost 4 years.
4
Yeah.
Yes.
Attorney Bishop was the counsel
Yeah.
in the initial time who originally came up with the answer I'm going to give right now. So effectively, we are, for lack of a better term, the state of Connecticut and the town and other states and other communities that allowed this. It's technically breaking the Federal Controlled Substance Act. With that said, the Obama administration and Trump administrations have not enforced the Controlled Substance Act. In fact, all the presidential candidates from 2016, all the 4 major ones, President Trump, Secretary Clinton, Libertarian Gary Johnson, and Green Party Joel Stein, all said in one manifestation or the other, they're for medical marijuana. So the Trump administration is also moving in that way, which is why this came back forward. So you have to go back before Trump was elected, back when you don't know a new president might crack down on drug laws. So what we found out, Trump, Clinton, they have the same position on the issue. One of them's going to be president. So it really didn't change much. But what defeated the regulation the first time was the fear of federal crackdown. And one of the answers Attorney Bishop illuminated to us is, one, we have the commission has the ability just to repeal or put forward another moratorium. That's one way to deal with it. 2, it's federal law, and if state law then also backs up federal law, there is no medical marijuana, and it's...
And that was pretty much my understanding. If it becomes a matter of federal enforcement or state law should change, then the entity ceases to be able to operate with a legal permit.
All right, 'cause I was just going down that road because I was wondering, with what Mr. Fuller said and Madam Chair said, I was just wondering that Attorney General Sessions is
But-
completely off onto a different rant, and he could want to try to
But-
push this out of
Right.
realm.
But like even the example we just had previously, the applicant takes that risk,
Right.
ultimately.
And I think even just to go off on a little tangent there, when we had the June 20th meeting with the applicants or the dispensary people that were here, they did discuss the age and going with whatever the state regs were, so, just so
Okay.
we're back there, I just wanted to bring that up again.
Very good. Okay. Can we get a motion to table
So moved.
by Mr. Giuliano, by Mr. Fuller, second by Mr. Giuliano? All in favor? Aye. Motion passes unanimously. As long as we get this done before the end of the year, I'll be happy.
Yeah. Let's get an admin session together and
Yeah.
crank it.
All right. North Avenue,
It's you again, Mark.
Mr. Giuliano, do you want to, you can just pick it up from where you are. I'm going to recuse myself
Absolutely.
from a decision and a vote on this application.
Okay, text amendment, 500 North Avenue LLC, amend the fee schedule to exempt 830G affordable housing projects from fees.
Motion to take off the table, Mr. Chair.
You could second.
call the vote.
I can do it from here. Can I call a vote?
Yes.
So, isn't it up for the little discussion?
Oh, no, it's just to take off the table.
They make a motion to take it off the table?
It was, you did make a
Yeah,
Nope.
this is the vote on the table.
Second it?
That was made and seconded. You just
Second,
need
all
to
right.
take a vote.
All right. All in favor of taking it off the table?
Aye.
I too. All four for taking it off. Now we can have a little discussion, right?
Mr. Chair, I have I already know the answer, but I have a question just for public record verification. I believe the Planning Commission voted unfavorably on this, so it would require a 4-vote majority to be approved.
That's correct.
With that said, I do agree with the concept that we might need to have our own fees for affordable housing versus special case or other, but I feel it's very inappropriate for the petitioner with some active cases to propose such a thing in a way that has to come from the town. That shouldn't come from an active petitioner. So I would not be in favor of this.
Go ahead, Jay.
I just wanted to mention that at the next meeting, we will have an application for a site plan review and formal fee schedule established for 830G applications so that we are in compliance with the Connecticut general statutes.
But we are already with surrounding towns for the 830G, aren't we? We're all in line basically with the 830Gs?
No.
We're not?
Currently, the way the regulations are written, it's been, applicants have observed the way we have required their applications be submitted. I think there's some gray area that's been pointed out by the applicant regarding this, and we decided to put it into action, make the corrections within the zoning regulations, and those will be before you on November 14th.
So, and then one other thing, Mr. Fuller said that somebody was consistent, but the paperwork says that the Planning Commission was inconsistent with favoring this 830G, so...
I think what Commissioner Fuller was saying is that the Planning Commission felt that the proposed text amendment and fee schedule changed was inconsistent with the POCD, and they gave an unfavorable recommendation.
Yeah.
Right. All right, is there any more discussion on that?
Well, I would just say if we've got a formal presentation of proposed fee changes coming forward in the next session, that it would make sense to deal with it then, and I would think we should dismiss this particular text amendment.
So you're saying you want to table this again, and
I'm not saying that.
Mr. Paul?
No, I'm inclined to agree with the ruling from the Planning Commission for the various reasons that they cited, so I certainly would agree with their ruling on this.
So my recommendation wasn't to table, but to vote on it, and then we'll move on when we've got the formal presentations. It'll be a different item. It won't be a text amendment presented.
I'll make a motion to deny without prejudice this text amendment.
I'll second that.
I have a second.
I would like to make just if the commission decides to deny this application, the reason should be stated on the record that.
Well, I'm denying to elaborate based on the recommendations and findings of the Planning Commission that's inconsistent with the Plan of Conservation and Development. Also that the way how this particular text amendment is written up, it puts additional financial burdens on the town that the town, not just the Planning and Zoning Commissions and the Planning and Zoning Department have to weigh, but the overall town legal, town administration, CAO office, finance, town clerk's office, everyone who has to deal with a zoning application. Because a lot of expert witnesses have to be brought into particularly large, maybe not small 830Gs, but particularly large 830Gs, often require a lot of expert testimony that oftentimes is put on the taxpayers. So I think it's fair to deny it, this particular incarnation of a text amendment without prejudice, without any if the petitioner were to come back with a more coherent regulation, because he did present to us, well, it's kind of up to you on where you want to go with it. That also presents kind of a very loose-ended text amendment, too, and I don't want to deal with loose-ended unless if we're intentionally trying to do so.
All right, so we'll have a motion then to deny
Motion to deny
with,
this
with,
statement
without prejudice.
without prejudice.
Second by Mr. Roguskis. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So be it moved. Should be it. That's it. Madam Chair, you're back up to bat.
All right, the next two items, the Stratford text amendment for the Building Needs Committee has been continued, and the 45 North Parade Street has been continued, and now we move on to the 140, 180 Watson Boulevard, which is still on the table. And the Erstadt Brittle Properties has been continued, both of them, and the 5104 East Main Street has been continued. The next, excuse me, the next body of work is, our administrative session is the approval of minutes. Moved by Mr. Paul, thank you.
Second it.
Second by Mr. Giuliano, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes unanimously. Now, I am going to ask to take one item out of order, because we have a number of people, a couple people here on the clock that I'd like to save the town some money with. I believe that's the, where's that one? Which one is that? Is that the Barnum Avenue one, right?
Number 8, Madam Chairman.
Yeah, number 8, 1189 Barnum Avenue, which is the minor site plan modification, new exit on Barnum Avenue. There we are.
Motion to take 1189 Barnum Ave off the, out of order.
Second that.
Motion by Mr. Fuller, second by Mr. Giuliano. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Motion passes unanimously. Okay, I think we have a couple of people here. Mr. Knott?
Madam Chairman, I would ask before you begin that you go into executive session, this body and the town attorney, as this item involves some pending litigation, and we should discuss that in executive session.
In executive session, all right. The town attorney has asked us to go into executive session on this particular item to, the reason is?
Pending litigation.
Pending litigation. All right, I'll accept that recommendation.
And then the motion should include who's going to go into executive session. It should be members of the commission and myself and your director.
Anybody else?
That's it.
Is there a motion to go into executive session?
I'll make the motion to go into executive session with the commissioners, planning and zoning, and
Attorney Leclerc and the planning and zoning administrator.
Yeah, that's what I said, planning and zoning administrator and attorney Leclerc.
Okay. Second by Mr. Roguskis. All in favor? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. I apologize. Mr. Paul, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. We are now moving into executive session. Thank you.